Welcome, Martin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Obvious introduction to do is just to say my name, Martin Goff, and my job role within Children's Services at Hampshire County Council is to be the lead officer in homeschool transport, school admissions, and school place planning. And just mentioning all three is quite deliberate because I think we're here more specifically around homeschool transport. But the other thing that has a great big link with the world that you're in through having the children that you've got is that you know that especially school placements are sort of running short at the moment given the current demography and population whose needs we're trying to meet. And my school place planning role includes feeding information in that is used for that school place planning decision making. And I don't know which particular schools you're from. Sarah was right to say that. I haven't done any sort of pre-thinking about which particular cases are going to come up. But if we just talk about Henry Tyndale School and the fact that it's now running satellite provision as well as its main site provision, that all that school place planning stuff that has come to try and have more capacity in the system is something I feed into. So I do have an awareness of that as well. Going on to homeschool transport and just saying a few things. The first thing is I always trot out a number now, which is around about 12,245. That's the number of children on transport every morning and afternoon being supported in their journey to and from school by colleagues who work with me in providing transport for your children. Now that large number includes those who are just attending usually their local secondary school. So around about 9,000 of that figure are children going on larger vehicles to and from school, their local secondary school. They'll either be getting their transport because it's more than 3 miles or because the route is unsafe. And then 3,200 plus young people are going to specialist provision on homeschool transport that we've organised. And I would characterise that by saying it's usually on a smaller vehicle, minibus size downwards, down to solo taxis, for example, in some cases. The minibuses perhaps do start with perhaps 20 or so students in schools like Baycroft. So that would be the largest size perhaps of a vehicle being used for specialist provision and children with special educational needs. And as I say, the size goes down from there. What have we got going on? There's something that I'll talk to you a little bit generally about. First of all, you'll all remember the 20th of March 2020, or maybe the day after that or the day before that. That was lockdown. I know it because my middle daughter was 18 on the 21st of March 2020 and had no celebration at all because we locked down the night before. And since then, our service has really had to adapt and shift around because things have been different. We had, on the Tuesday before the 20th of March, to phone round 83 colleagues who were school escorts, aged over 70, who were not going to be allowed to work once lockdown began. And some of those people have come back and some of them haven't. The workforce, both escorts and drivers, is older. It just is. And so that's been a challenge for us. We navigated our way through COVID and we put on extra services, we put on fewer services in adapting to the needs. And more recently, one of the things I have to share honestly with you is we've had difficulty with there being no back cover arrangements in place, no more back cover capacity. So when a driver phones in sick, before COVID, we'd have almost certainly been able to get a driver in to replace that, but we've started to struggle with that relief escort and that relief driver in more recent weeks. And a typical week now might see across my 1,400 daily contracts, something like a dozen routes per week not being able to run. And as a result, so that's 1,400 per day, that's something like 7,000 per week, and about a dozen are falling over. And that might affect 30 children. And I know how much that impacts families and working parents and things that you thought you can do at the start and the end of the day. But I just want to be honest with you and share that's a feature of the service more recently. In addition to that, since Brexit, across England, there are 160,000 fewer licensed taxi drivers. I haven't got an equivalent figure for just Hampshire, and I wouldn't want an equivalent figure for just Hampshire because I procure my services wider than just Hampshire. But that's made a big difference to our ability to arrange new transport. And then the other factor just to mention as a current, before I just go into consultation and then I stop, which is, you know how much petrol's gone up? I'm sure you do. And my taxi companies are just charging serious sums of money now. That, you know, it's some crazy journeys, you know, from from Fleet to Hartney Whitney that was costing £50 a day. And when I put the parent in to act as an escort for their young person because they needed that additional support, and I couldn't acquire an escort from our bank of escorts, it went up to £100 a day. Well, that's serious sums of money. That's more expensive than the educational placement just to get the child to and from school. So I'm battling every day with costs. Moving into consultation, and then as I say, I'll stop and invite some questions. You'll have seen that we've recently opened a consultation that's closing round about now. And that specifically talks to two things and introducing those two things into policy. The first of those that it refers to is pick-up points, use of pick-up points for children with SEN. And by that we mean we're not coming all the way to the home. We're going to be saying to families, can you as parents get your child accompanied as necessary to this safe pickup point? And the second of those, the second consultation point is around the use of multiple destinations. So where children live geographically close, the vehicle that picks them up, rather than just going to one destination and one school, might be going to more than one school. Now, both of these things we already do. So schools like Baycroft, dozens of their children get to pick up points every morning and join a vehicle and get safely into school. And in terms of multiple schools, we do that. You know, there are some circumstances. The classic example is Maple Ridge and Dove House in Basingstoke, where children attending the two schools end up on the same vehicle. And the reason for talking about it and making it a point for policy and consultation is by saying it clearly in the policy, it opens the door for more use of pickup points and more use of multiple destinations. And the reason for needing to do that is it's not been in the mindset of the service to work that way. Largely what we do is we pick up children and take them just to one school. So if there's 3 kids on the transport, they're probably all attending the same school. In terms of pickup points, we do try and use them, but as I say, it's not really designed into the service all that often unless it's already there, like in the Baycroft example. So I'm sure it is controversial. I know it's controversial in that I've had 3 online consultation events in which every slot has been taken up by a family with children with a child with SEN, and people wanted to talk about this use of pickup points and this use of multiple destinations. But we're building it into policy to be clearer that it's an option that we will consider in the future. So that's a whistle-stop tour of our recent world in homeschool transport. It's exciting every day. No day goes by with my 1,400 contracts without something needing a bit of managing, be it the poorly escort, sometimes some young people on the transport don't have their best ever day, and things happen during the transport arrangements that we need to respond to. So there's a lot going on. You'll know, because you'll have looked at the report, it's costing the county council about £34 million a year. That will only go up. In my world, I've never seen transport costs come down. So when petrol goes up, everyone gets in touch with me and say, will you increase my contract price? When petrol comes down, I've never had an operator get in touch and say, you know what, I could give you back £20 a day now because petrol's come down in price.
We need a fleet of electric school buses, Martin.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, what's sitting behind electricity is fuel prices, isn't it? So it might not work. And actually on that front, there is some good work going on. But that's another thing about the tier of the world in which you live. You live in a 3-tier authority. You've got your county council, you've got your district and borough councils, and then you've got your parish councils. all the licensing of the smaller vehicles goes on in that middle tier, and we don't have that direct influence there. I've got the same responsibilities on the Isle of Wight. It's a one-tier authority. So if I want to talk to the licensing authority, I'm talking to myself, and I can get changes. So all our taxis are what they call Euro 6 compliant on the Isle of Wight, and most of them are in Hampshire. So they're cleaner vehicles, but they're certainly not electric vehicles, Sarah, and that's some distance away. But there are some steps around climate change that a big transport function like ours are trying to take, but we don't really hold all the nudges or the pushes or the pulls to make things happen quickly. Should I stop and take some questions? That was what I would hope to say.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so we're starting off with some real basics. How are transport arrangements made for children starting new schools or settings in September, and who is responsible for arranging this?
Brilliant. That's something else I perhaps could have started with, but it's like we've worked this all out, Sarah, and you've asked the right question. The system in Hampshire has been around for a long time, and some of the colleagues in the Transport Service, literally, they moved under my direct line manager in 2018. The 3 people organising SEN transport for the most part had worked for the authority since 2000. They had been there at the turn of the century and were still there 18 years later. But the system right now is designed around children being placed by the SEN service, the SEN service taking a decision around eligibility, and your child may be eligible for transport because they live the statutory distance from their nearest suitable provision, or they live within the statutory distance, but they're not eligible, they're not able to safely or actually walk the distance. So that eligibility decision takes place in the SEN service, and they advise my transport team about your children and their eligibility. The schools have been making applications on behalf of parents for the transport to be set up. We hope in a week or two to change that. So any child starting in a new placement in September, parents will be nudged to make an application on behalf of their child. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is legally, I want that. As the head of service, I want you as parents to have made the application and tick the box that said, you know, the terms and conditions, and then to be directly engaged with me, because you will become directly engaged with the service. But it's a little bit odd that the schools have represented you in making that application. So there's a first reason there that is just around getting the right relationship between the service and the parents. The second reason, Sarah, that I'd always cite is I think I need to know what you think as parents about your child and their needs on transport. Especially if you take a circumstance, you know, loads of children going to Shepherdstown School will go to Osborne School, and then Osborne School will make the application for the child. And they know a bit about the youngster, and they know a bit about them perhaps on transport, but I don't feel I'm getting the rounded picture until I've heard what you've got to say, and I've heard what the school's got to say, and I've heard what my colleagues in SEN have got to say. And right now I'm really only relying on that latter 2, the schools and the SEN colleagues. And then we start to talk to you. Well, there's no reason why we don't start that talking that bit sooner. What I do know, I'll say dangerously now, some parents might want to really put together the case for what their child needs on transport in a way that is their perception and might naturally sit in opposition to how we want to do things, because instinctively my service will say, if it can, I want your child on group transport. And we'll say that to you because it's cheaper for me. Round about £8,000 a child on transport in Hampshire. If you go on a solo taxi, the price is instantly at least double. So group transport is good for the money. Group transport is usually good for the children on the transport. I hear from SEN families all the time. I've got 2 nephews with significant SEN in Birmingham City Council's administrative area getting the same sort of service your children are accessing. And they can really quite look forward to that transport arrangement in the morning. It can make their day start as, you know, really quite well. And then that thing of getting them to school ready, willing and able to learn is something that I think we often achieve. And therefore, group transport can be really good and it can be time saving. So I know in having parents apply, there might be a lot of people saying my child really needs to travel on their own. And then some of the asks that parents make, we won't be able to meet easily, and we might not intend to meet at all. But I still want the parental application process. And ideally, I'd like it for this September for children in primary to secondary transition.
Okay, so if we've got a parent who's, they've got their placement for September, what are they doing? Are they holding fire for the moment?
Yes, but normally what would be happening is the school your child would be going to would be saying, don't worry, I've got it all in hand. And when we get past Easter, they would start sending me those applications to a process called, if anyone's been through it, TSEN1. So the TSEN1 would come from the schools. And then once we've got that, we'd start organising transport. What we want to do this year is we're just waiting for the IT to be ready. And then once it's ready, we'll push it out to parents as a link. You make your application because you know your child is going to be eligible.
I think what I hear frequently in the groups I facilitate is that people don't know about their transport till sometimes very, very late in the day. And when we're talking about young people who potentially have significant anxiety and parents who are trying to run their lives, hearing about transport to start on let's say it's the 7th of September and the 6th of September is a real challenge for people.
Agreed. And my transport colleagues who do all the organising, I don't know if any of you have had support from colleagues like Jenny Payne. She is just a transport planner supreme, absolutely fantastic. And she would love to know by 1st of August exactly who's going to Sam Cody on transport that she has organised, and then start communicating with parents so they have 3 or 4 weeks of running. The problem we've had is, and I don't know if any of your families that have joined the call were around for our September 2020 experience or September 2021 experience. The TSEN process involves schools filling in the form. It comes into the centre, it gets approved by SEN, and then it comes to us to start working with. So there's 2 steps in there that I've got no control over. And if one of those steps doesn't happen, Jenny Payne, who's sitting there waiting to organise all Sam Cody's transport, doesn't know about all the children. But then she takes a leap and starts organising it. And then she gets 5 more forms. And then it needs replanning because you can't just necessarily easily add children on. So part of this conversation and coming direct to parents is an almost third benefit, which is I think you'll be better at making those applications in a timely fashion than schools linked to the SEN service. And schools have been very good. I'm not knocking schools. It's much more the 2 further steps that it has to take. School to SEN, approval by SEN, onto transport that has been the hold up.
Yeah, but do you know, Martin, in my get-together sessions where I meet with parents in September, the biggest issue on the table in September is always transport, because people don't, they don't know what's happening. And I think when you take into account that people are potentially, they've got to get to work, they've got to live their lives. This is potentially people having, and I know about people giving up work in order to get their child to school. It's important that people know. And if one of the, let's call it a fringe benefit of parents applying for themselves is people know sooner, that would be brilliant.
And the bit that eventually you'd want, and I haven't got this, but I'm just describing sort of, if I ruled the world moments, but ideally there'd be this portal that you could log on to. And if everything was there by the 10th of August and you saw it and started to work from that, just acknowledging that it's not impossible there'll be a change, because our reality is, if you take a school, I'll keep naming actual schools, we transport over 100 children to Osborne with special educational needs, including their 6th form provision. And that's really quite complicated stuff to get working well. And then Osborne gets something called OzKings, which is Osborne's offer, but at a different site. And then do OzKings students go with Osborne students? All those things are being factored in. So it's inevitable, and I think it happens in most authorities, that there are elements that are a bit last minute for September. But I think one of the difficulties is you're in radio silence, aren't you, all the way through until this well, you start ringing us, but then, you know, suddenly on the 4th of September, you know what's happening for the 6th of September. And we've got to give you a better lead in if we can. And just acknowledging that there might be some changes later on. One way in which we've done it.
A bit of empathy for the parents, I think, in the situation that they find themselves in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think my individual colleagues could give you empathy when you ring because you still haven't heard. Yeah. But I think we've already lost the discussion then, because you're understandably anxious. You've got other things to manage in your lives. You mentioned work, Sarah, but classically the other thing that we're making difficult for you is if you've got other school-age children, how are you going to work around that piece of daily management as parents? You know, it's really tricky stuff, isn't it? And if in the blueprint for this, we appoint transport. If it's brand new to you as families, those operators often get in touch with you so that you've met the driver before they turn up on the door. If that happens, that's brilliant. What fills my box is when somebody's not, basically a parent gets a knock on the door at 8:11. I'm your new driver and I'm taking your child to school.
You've got to hand over your precious.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, I'm a parent. I've got 3 kids. I've got two nephews with significant additional needs.
Let's move on slightly to eligibility. Yeah. So a parent said, I'm new to all of this. From what I understand, we would only get transport or be eligible for transport if we live over 3 miles away. And you would only get transport over 3 miles away if you take the local authority school of choice. If you dispute the school, does this mean you would not get transport?
Yeah, so there's I hope my style of delivery is okay with everybody, but I've got to tell you this. 1944 transport legislation came into being. Now, I'm the only person in the room vaguely close to 1944, and I'm still miles away from it. So it's not very modern, but it got rewritten in 1996. Well, I'd say it's not very modern if it was last written in 1996. But the law is actually that children can walk up to 2 miles to school, age 4 to 7, let's say, and then magically on their 8th birthday, they can walk 3 miles to school. So you're right, whoever's written that in, if your child is 8 or over, it's a 3-mile qualifying statutory distance. So that's what's written in the legislation. And if your nearest suitable school is further than that distance apart, the local authority must provide home to school transport and not charge the user. So it has to be free to the user. So nearest suitable provision then becomes the discussion if we're just looking at the distance. And nearest then can become debatable. That's where the parental preference or choice comes in, because if the local authority, my SEN colleagues, can identify a school that's 1.6 miles from your home, but there's a school that's 3.5 miles from your home, which you prefer your child to attend, that, you know, and both meet the definition of suitable provision, then it is the case that you wouldn't qualify for transport if you chose that further away placement. Now, my understanding of the rules is that parental choice is king in terms of the placement decision making. So my SCN colleague can't refuse that parental choice if there's a space in the school, but the transport eligibility doesn't flow with the parental choice of placement.
How does one appeal a transport decision?
Say that again?
How does one appeal a transport decision? So there's an appeal process if you're not comfortable with the school. If you're not comfortable with the decision that's been made about transport, how does somebody challenge that?
Okay, written into the policy, towards the end, is an appendix that copies information that comes straight out of statutory home to school guidance that the Department for Education publishes, and it's an appeals process that all authorities must run. And there's a stage 1 of the appeal process, which essentially is, if you've been refused, somebody looks at your circumstances again if you say you want to appeal, and decide whether or not that original eligibility decision to refuse was correct. If you're still refused after stage 1, there is a stage 2 process where an independent appeal panel will be brought together to hear your case as to why you believe you should still be provided with transport. And that is a very specific to transport only discussion. You can't go into the wider stuff around placements. You can say things about your child's needs, but we're really only thinking about the transport aspects and none of the wider aspects when you go through that process.
Okay, and another sort of criteria for transport going the other way. Somebody has said, is there a maximum distance that transport will be provided over?
Well, I can't see how many people are on the call, but you're covering all the bases.
Hang on a minute. I've got it shut down. I'll tell you, we've got 5. But they're quite busy. They've written me lots of questions, Martin.
Okay, that's good. That's really good. Okay. Again, I'm going to rely on something the Department for Education wrote down. This one probably wasn't 1944. I think it's had a little bit more recent evolution. They advise, where possible, that the journey from home to school, so that means leaving the house and getting to school, should be no more than 45 minutes for a primary age child and no more than 75 minutes for a secondary phase age student. They don't write
on time.
Pardon?
It's interesting, isn't it, that it's done on time, because that would mean a journey in London versus a journey, I don't know, in the New Forest might be completely different.
Absolutely, yeah. And then of course, in one way though, Sarah, you might say it makes sense because if you live in Brockenhurst and you've got to get to Tottenham,
yeah,
it is as long as it is. But the roads will let you go quite well until you get to Lyndhurst, and then you've done the Lyndhurst one-way system, and you might have a decent run into Tottenham. So it can work out well. There are some geographies in Hampshire that just stop me meeting those guidelines. It just isn't possible, and that becomes especially so for certain post-16 provision, because that's really quite distant from some of the
because that would have been my question, because potentially you have a young person, and post-16 is an interesting one, and you can give us a explanation of post-16 transport as well. That'd be great, because some children may be travelling outside of county, mightn't they?
Yeah. So I mean, for my Isle of Wight duties, one of the young people I transport goes to Worcester, which is not far from my accent, and another one travels to Devon. And so in post-16 we face some really significant challenges, and those are they're not travelling every day, obviously, but they're travelling every week. They're going Monday to Friday boarding and coming home at weekends and travelling back on Sunday nights, which is quite a lot of travelling, which clearly is going to break the 75 minutes. We've got some really good specialist colleges that are beyond the county border. Newbury College provides a lot of our post-16 provision in Hampshire. There's stuff going on in Guildford. There's one of the agricultural colleges in Sparshot, but there's another one in Guildford. There's certain provision once you get down into the forest that is only over the border in Dorset and further. So yeah, we do go to some quite distant places. That's also true. I don't know if any of the people on the call have got their young person in an independent non-maintained setting, but the journeys to those can be quite long as well. Not places like Moor House, where we actually place quite a lot of children, but some of the other independent non-maintained sector settings are really quite distant. And I've transported children from Winchester to Hindhead for the whole of their secondary phase. That's a long journey for anybody to be going through.
So, post-16, how does the process work for post-16?
Post-16 is not part of the same statutory framework. So homeschool transport has a significant statutory framework. At post-16, what the government have written into their post-16 transport policy guidance, another great bedtime read, is the duty on the local authority is to consult annually and produce a post-16 transport policy statement. And in that policy statement, they must provide, through the policy statement, they must provide the transport that they think is necessary to facilitate attendance at school.
Okay.
At sixth form. And then the duty splits into young people of sixth form age, which is 16, 17 and 18, and those young people who are going beyond that in the FE sector and 19 plus, and that becomes what's called the adult duty. Now, there's loads of detail even within that, but the first and most important thing to say is there's no requirement to provide any transport for free. So in Hampshire, there has been a parental contribution to post-16 transport since 2012, More recently, it went from a single price requirement of £600 a year to a tiered requirement based on how far the journey is. And what I would say is that the highest figure in there is £1,320. That's the most we ask a parent to pay. Typically, the cost to actually provide that transport is around about £5,000 a student. So we ask for a parental contribution, but it doesn't cover the cost.
And does that service, how does that work in terms of accessing that provision? So with your primary and secondary age kids, currently we've got the local authority talking to the school, but we're hoping that it's going to be the parents applying. With the 16 plus provision, how do parents access that service for their young people?
Parents apply annually, so even if you know you've signed up for a 3-year course, we still ask you to apply annually. Part of the reason for that is it's an annual policy statement, so in principle it could change the following year. Therefore, the grounds for awarding transport one year might be different the next. The second is a lot of young people in post-16 sector who we're providing transport for are on courses that aren't typical, 2-year A-level provision with a view to going off to university at the end of that stage. It's often 1-year courses with progression elements to them. So Life Skills 1, Life Skills 2, Life Skills 3. But our post-16 providers are often needing to almost reinvent that annually based on their funding for the courses. So we never assume 1 year to the next is the same for the post-16 students. So parents apply annually. That opens, we've just gone through the process to decide the post-16 transport policy statement. We finished the consultation. On the 23rd of March, it goes to the executive member for her to decide if she approves it. And once we've got that approval, which then takes 5 days to bed down because of the council processes, we will then have a published policy statement and we can start accepting applications.
That's for this September.
And that's for this September. And so, you'd be making an application March into April. That's another area where I think we've not done well enough in terms of giving you advance notice. Because in some cases...
not everyone's going to know their placement yet, are they? So
that's partly why. So you can put your application in and you think for certain they're going to Newbury College, but quite what course they're going to do isn't quite known. Well, I can't set up transport until I know you've got a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday attendance pattern or a Tuesday, Thursday, Friday attendance pattern. And that's going on for something like 350 students. When your young person is in post-16 in a school sixth form, life is lots more straightforward, I think, because generally they have them in for 5 days and generally it copies that school day makeup. And so it's easier for me, perhaps easier for you as well. Colleges, over the last 5 to 7 years, have really moved to delivering their provision in fewer than 5 days of attendance, and 3 days of attendance is usually what you get.
It's interesting you should say that, because of course young people with SEN are entitled to 5 days of provision.
Yes.
So if they go to college 3 days and they go somewhere else for their other 2 days, because they're entitled to those other 2 days, do you then provide transport for those other 2 days as well?
It wouldn't. I mean, I only know of young people who are placed in post-16 settings under the adult duty who've had those additional days, and that would usually come through the social care offer, and social care will, if it's appropriate, organise the transport. So it doesn't come back to my homeschool.
It doesn't come into education. It's social.
That's been my experience of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I know that what you get in is classed as a full-time course. I also know I used to be head of maths in course and systems. That was my job before I joined this world. And so it's written in those funding rules for these post-16 settings that there needs to be, and the number changes slightly, but about 16.5 hours of contact and delivery. And so they just redesigned their courses, didn't they, to deliver them over quite a long day, but just 3 days. It's not quite so true of A-level students and GCSE type qualifications, but that's certainly the world your young people will be in. So the requirement, the other thing just about drop-off is we we take the young people into college settings and school settings and try to have one arrival and one departure each morning and afternoon. And some of our settings create quite quite creative timetables, you know, with a 10:10 start and a 2:05 finish, and that gets really quite difficult for us. So by holding the line around arrivals, single arrivals and single departures, what we're trying to do there is for them to box their offer in a way that fits in with the young people arriving on our transport as much as possible. It works well with most colleges, but it doesn't work well with every college, and it doesn't work well with every timetable, particularly if one of your young people stops accessing the whole timetable because they don't like a bit of their offer, so they're allowed to finish a bit early.
We've got a post-16 parent on the course who's asked a question. Rather than you organising it, can a parent have a personal budget or mileage allowance rather than arrange transport to facilitate attendance for post-16?
In principle, yes. There's a little bit that's tricky about it because what we're doing is we're providing transport where it's necessary to facilitate attendance. So in the first discussion, particularly with those parents of students who are sixth form age, one of the questions we ask you is, can you take your own child to college? And if you can do that, we're not needed to facilitate attendance. And so we can actually say, therefore, your child's not eligible.
And if they're not eligible, they don't get any funding for that either, presumably.
That's it, yeah. So the parent who says I could take them is in a way doing me a favour because it's cheaper than me getting a taxi.
And doing themselves out of.
And then also they're saying, well, I can take them, and then at that point I'm saying, well, there's no way I can fund it. We do fund some in some circumstances, just because it just makes sense to, and that's really that appeals route that you mentioned earlier, Sarah. So the policy position is often kind of quite straight-backed, and it has to be because you're handling 12,200 people's transport and thousands of fresh applications each year. So the first policy consideration is often quite straightforward, rigid application of the policy, but there'll be some circumstances in which we'll go beyond the policy and provide what's called an exceptional arrangement.
Okay, I've got a question about transport, or when you know that there's transport going from near you, because and this is one I hear quite often, but there's a taxi picking up the girl next door but one. This particular question is, if you know there's transport near to your home and you have a placement but not the transport, but you know there's space in the transport, are you able to pay for a seat, as that would be better than having to give up work? So that in a way is almost going back to personal budget and saying, but can I pay for that place?
So if we're talking school age young people, then we have something called the privileged places scheme. And a privileged seat.
Say that again, a privileged basis scheme.
Places or spaces.
Sorry, privileged, yeah.
And basically we sell you a seat. And the prices we use are the same as the ones in the post-16 transport policy statement. So it might be £600 a year if the journey's less than 5 miles and so on. But the thing about those, and this is difficult for our council members as well, is it's a spare seat on the day you buy it. And if another young person comes along who's eligible, that's who I have to provide for first. And so it is really a sort of, it's not guaranteed for the whole of the school year, and we might take it away from you if we have an eligible child comes along who requires it. Now, I know we sell many of these privileged seats, and they never get used other than by the person who bought it. Nobody late comes to the party and needs the seat. But there is that requirement. And then the other thing is, I don't know if any of the people on the call have been involved in late placement. That drawn out discussion.
I suspect lots of them have been involved in late placements.
Yeah. So what we've learned over the last 2 or 3 main rounds, the September organising, is what it looks like on the 6th of September is really quite different by the end of September, and still changing as we go to October, because late placements are just much more part of the party than they used to be. And that's really quite tricky for us, because we sell you a seat at the beginning of October and we've taken it away by the end of October because there's a late placed child who needs a seat. your your best efforts and our best efforts have been wasted. And so we often don't sell our privileged seats until we get past October half term, because that should be a more stable time in the school year. And that's especially true at post 16. You know, in post 16,
how does somebody buy one of those seats?
There's a link on our website.
Oh, brilliant! That's a completely new one to me, so that's really interesting.
Okay, I mean, it's harder with taxis. You know, you're trying to match your demand. But say I've got to get a bus.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare, Martin. I have to be honest.
Well, yeah, and with a double-decker bus, if I've got 55 students needing a seat, I'm probably going to get a double-decker which has got 70 seats. I mean, then I've got 15 to sell, and I've got 15 to play with. Whereas, you know, if I'm getting a taxi, there might be three seats in the back of the saloon car. There might be two young people who need to sit apart, and so the spare seat isn't even spare. So yeah, there's possibilities, but they're never going to be guarantees, and they're always quite late.
In a minute, when we get a second or at the end, I'd love you to find me that link about the places and how people find out about those. I've got a couple of questions that go back to you talking about the consultation. So let me read you the first one. How can pick-up points for children with ASD who have homeschool anxiety, attachment issues, rely on school escorts? How can the child have a positive transition with this policy? My son is going into his final GCSE year at a resource-based unit and would refuse to go to school if this was the case where we live, a small village over 3 miles from school. We've always felt very lucky to have transport we have, but the changes proposed do not seem to respect or support his disabilities. We have had our routes changed 3 times this year and have the prospective change again after Easter. Have no problem with group transport, but do have issues with multiple pickups not being collected from home. That just wouldn't work. And then somebody else has said, huge concerns over the transport consultation and the risks involved. Just how much will you listen to parents and the feedback provided, and how do you propose to feedback on the outcomes?
Okay, so I go back to part of what I said in my early preamble, which is we're bringing it into policy so that we can make greater use of it. We're not bringing it into policy so that every child has a pickup point.
I'm being really pedantic, Martin, and I did say I could be pedantic. It's a consultation, so you're hoping to bring it into policy, but it is a consultation, and I think what the parents are saying is, will their feedback be listened to and fed into that?
Yeah, and my words weren't quite carefully chosen enough, but bringing it into policy is not, even if it gets there, is not the same as saying we will do it for every child. I want to say that first of all.
Okay, so it's an option.
Well, it opens it up for us to make more use of it. That's the critical factor. The next thing then, I've spoken to 45 families directly in the 3 sessions that I've done, and they brought this up. And you know how often when you're having a discussion about young people with SEN, there's more for you to learn. And I was talking to a parent the other day whose SEN child is now big enough to be thought of as an adult, and if he's walking down the road and he doesn't fancy it, he just sits down. Now, I've never heard of that before, but if I give him a 400-metre walk to his pickup point, and he's on a day on which he just sits down, nothing his mum and dad can do can get him all the way to that pickup point. So if I propose it for that student, those parents have got a basis on which to come back to me and say, do you realise this is what it's like? There's another appeal from last year where a parent said, put me on the spot and was quite right. You've Googled how long it takes to walk from my house to, well, it was the school in that occasion, and it tells you 11 minutes. Well, come and experience it with me and my daughter, because it won't take 11 minutes. It would, on a very good day, it might take 11 minutes, but we walk past the playground. I can't keep moving when we go past the playground. If the dog passes our path, etc., etc., you know all these things. So if you like, you could think of it as the computerized solution shows that if these 3 people aren't picked up in their homes, but they get to a collective pickup point, you save this many minutes and this many miles, and therefore there's this much saving in making that transport arrangement. But if none of those 3 young people can actually be successfully brought to the pickup point, then you can't do it.
Can't work.
The other thing
so basically you're placing another option on the menu, aren't you, for yourself?
And we already use it, but it's not in policy. So
Okay.
I argued with the lawyers and said, do I really need to put this into policy? Because I'm already doing it. So it was almost like me being told maybe you shouldn't be already doing it, but it's been part of the furniture. Anyone who's got, I don't know if anyone on the call has got Goff House or Maple Ridge children, but they have been going together to those establishments in all the time I've been involved.
I put the link to the consultation on the chat, folks. So, I mean, if you're here, I would strongly suggest you do complete that consultation, because like any of these things, it's easy to say after the case, but if we don't take the time to fill in the form and feedback. So the next part of that question, Martin, was how will parents hear about the outcomes of the consultation?
Okay, so I'm going to answer it. We joked about question time. This is sort of my question time answer, but it is addressing the point, I promise. There's a timetable that we're trapped in. We're going through a period of statutory consultation. That will conclude. There are already thousands of replies, so the analysis of the straightforward stuff is fine, but I think we've got close to 900 free text responses that we need to analyse. And then it is going to come back to the July decision day, where the executive lead member has to decide on what will be the policy. That policy, in theory, applies immediately, but September 2022's transport it's already taking form by the time the decision is taken around the policy. And so if there are going to be changes as a result of the policy change, my view is the earliest we would be implementing is Easter 2023. So although the transport policy change might be...
Easter 2023, was that? Okay.
2023. Yeah. So we are just a bit less than a year away from any changes resulting from it. But I'll be honest with you, one of the things we've got that has just become a really good product in the sense that it works in the way that it's designed is really clever geographical information systems attached to really good route planning systems, which come up with some unbelievably good computer solutions around how to get children to school. And then there's a fourth and a fifth and a sixth tier, which involves, well, will it work for those children? Will it work in that setting? Okay, you've got a bus, it can't go down that road, so forget that one. There was a parent on the call the other day who had experienced the pickup point for their child with special education needs because they lived in a cul-de-sac, and the cul-de-sac didn't let our vehicle go in and turn around safely, so they had to bring their child to a pickup point. So they'd almost trialled it for themselves. And do you know what they'd done? They'd moved house because it wasn't working and they needed a home pickup. So I know the way in which these things can work for you as families or not work for you as families.
We shouldn't need people to move house to access transport, though, should we? That really is a bit drastic.
Well, you say that, though, but I don't want any children on my transport when the vehicle is reversing.
Yeah.
And that became the issue. Even if I picked that child up first, we had to reverse the vehicle. And the parents got that, and so they trialled it, and they just thought it's good. This is going to be with us forevermore. So let's just move house.
That's a commitment.
Isn't
okay.
It?
What happens when the SEN team write on your EHCP that you can only have the college place or indeed any setting place if you pay for your own transport, which is something that I know is not unusual. Do you have to appeal to get the wording changed and then appeal for transport, or can it be agreed at the first appeal?
Right. Okay. I mean, in that circumstance, you get a very clear message from the authority that you're not eligible for transport. And in almost all of those circumstances, I'm imagining that what's happened there is the SEN service have identified a placement closer to your home than the one that is named in the EHCP. And there's a lot of case law around it. There's LDSCO decision making around this, and to create the position that the authority wants to hold, we must write in stark terms for you as parents so that you understand that if placement B is offered and that's further away than placement A, you're not attending the nearest suitable provision and there will be no transport eligibility. Would it be overturned in that circumstance by stage one of the transport appeals process? I wouldn't expect it to be. That doesn't deny you the right to go to the independent appeal panel and explain other circumstances that you feel haven't been fully taken account of, because that eligibility decision is focusing on the statute of, do you live further than the statutory distance? Yes or no? Is there a special educational need that stops your child walking that distance? And then thirdly, are they attending the nearest suitable provision?
Now this particular young person, mum's just added an extra bit. So there is no other placement. So this is the placement. There isn't a nearer alternative. I'm guessing it's quite a specialist placement. And I presume that they have on the EHCP. And I've seen it used almost as a bartering tool, Martin, that you can have this college place if you agree that you're not having transport.
Is it on the distance?
Sorry?
Is it on the distance?
It's well, who knows? But I have seen it written on EHCPs where it is said, well, there is sort of it's done like a bit of a barter. You can have this place, but we're not paying for transport. So then as a parent, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because that's the right setting. But you've been told that your child can only have it if you sort out transport. I've seen that a few times.
And the bit that, because we've sort of entered a specific without, staying in generalities, but if it is literally the only place they can go to, it is by definition nearest suitable.
Yeah. So
it comes down to whether or not that only word is only believed by the parents, and as a colleague in the SEN service.
I suspect I know a little bit more about the background, that there is a further complication in this particular situation, which we're not going into, because I suspect that the young person's 16 plus.
I'm not sure.
Did that make a difference or not?
No, the post-16 thing is, okay. So the statute says facilitate attendance where necessary, provide transport to facilitate attendance where necessary. We write into policy that will only provide transport if it's far enough away and the nearest suitable provision. So it's not got quite the same definition as it has when you look at the statute and school age young people, but we interpret it the same, and we rely on our SEN colleagues. So if you live in the right place, if you live in Medstead in East Hampshire on the road between Alton and Alsford, then your nearest provision would be at Alton College, if only Alton College had some decent SEN post-16 provision. So I take young people from Medstead to Newbury, which seems crazy, but it is their nearest suitable provision, while there isn't the alternatives. Alton is now opening some post-16 provision for young people with learning difficulties. It might be that families living in that area can then start to access the provision at Alton. And I would expect the SEN service to first and foremost think, can Alton College meet the needs of the young people in 4 months in Medstead?
You know, Martin, I think we might have got through all of our questions. I'm just flicking through to make sure. Oh, I've got one more. Hang on, I know there's one more near the top that's slightly different. So let me just find it. My young person is out of school but on roll at a junior school. We are hoping to arrange attendance once a week at a provision other than school, which SEN have confirmed. Could we ask for transport as it's not local? Senko has asked transport and they have said no, because he's on roll at a school. He won't qualify for this. So the question is, the young person is on roll at a school but is getting some alternative provision. Could he get transport to that provision?
Usually no. So the policy position that's been presented to the parent that's asking the question is correct. Whether or not we would do it as an exception to transport would come up, and I don't know who's brokering the different placement, whether or not it's coming from the primary behaviour service.
It's SEN who confirmed the placement.
Right. We don't usually provide transport for part-time attendance or like 1 day a week at. So because the way in which the statutory duty is written, the normal circumstance would be that you're attending only full-time, the place named on your statement. However,
if the failure to provide transport meant that young person was unable to attend school, let's say I don't know, but let me just give you a for instance. The child goes to a school that they can walk to with their parents, but they're not coping at that school. They've got another setting agreed, but the parent doesn't drive. Is there any provision for that scenario where a child cannot attend school unless transport is provided?
Through exception. So the policy, straight back policy says no, the exception would need to be looked at. The other element that comes into play here, Sarah, and parents asking the question is, I'll go to a different scenario and say why we wouldn't provide him that. If something's going on in school and it's just not working out, and the school and the parent come together and agree that something else would be better for them, we're not in that picture at all, and the main placement is the main placement, and therefore, you know, we wouldn't provide transport to this alternative destination. Once the SEN service are saying it's not 5 days a week, it's only part-time, either through a single day's attendance or half-day attendance or whatever. Once the SEN service are saying it's the right placement, the authority's duty gets ramped up compared to that circumstance in which school and parent reach a consensus to try and support the needs of a particular child. So you're moving in the right direction if this is something the SEN service has brokered for you. But our standard policy position, as I said, would be to refuse.
For those scenarios where you're obviously saying there's a human exception comes into it, how do people sort of put themselves forward to be considered for that?
Well, you have to first of all be formally refused, because that triggers the.
How would you even get into the system to be formally refused in that scenario?
Well, that does get difficult. I would recommend, if there's not, because it sounds like in the particular case we're discussing, the young person might be attending a mainstream provision.
Yeah, it's a mainstream provision, but then yeah.
So the mainstream school can't apply on your behalf for a school transport provision to a totally different destination. That just isn't how it works. Yeah. At the moment, we still haven't got the parent-led application process. Another good reason for having it, in my opinion. So, you know, we take the next step.
So would the SEN team then be the ones driving that and coming to transport and saying, look, this needs to be an exception. This child can't. Yeah.
As the parent, I would ask the SEN service if they've already done that. And if
the
not,
SEN team are recommending somewhere, everyone agrees it's right, but the child can't get there, then, you know, I think
that's exactly, yeah. And if the SEN service has sort of taken our refusal, which is still right under the policy, the parent needs to say, I'm intending to appeal that decision, and then that information will get passed into my team where we handle appeals. Appeal hearings are scheduled every month because we find that the most efficient way to do it, and in a good month nobody's appealing, but to avoid the delay, just that administrative thing of trying to set up an appeal hearing. What happens if a parent has to go all the way to an independent appeal panel is we can tell you what the dates are for those panel hearings already, because they're already done.
Brilliant. Crikey, we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you. Appreciate that. It's very technical, and you know, obviously everybody's situation, by the very definition of what we're talking about, is totally unique. If you could find us that link that you said was on the website for where people can apply for, did you call them privileged places?
Privileged seats, yeah.
That would be brilliant, because people often say to me, professionals often say to me, just Google it, and I'm not a fan of just Google, because I think sometimes it's easy when you know what to Google, and otherwise it's not necessarily. If you find that, I'll just give this other lot over here a quick briefing. Okay, so thanks to all of you for coming along and joined us today. I hope that's been useful. We will be recording it and popping it up on our various channels. We have several other sessions coming up over the coming week. I think we've got one next week, which is a long postponed Meet the SEN about the complaint system. And then we've got a SENDIAS clinic coming up going forward to the 1st of April on incompatible settings. All those bits are shared on our Hampshire Parent Carer Network pages, so do have a look there. Martin, I've got one more question that I don't know if you can answer whilst you are looking for your link, which is how long is the current wait for a transport appeal hearing?
It comes down to timing, but by having them scheduled every month, the longest anyone would have to wait would be sort of if you started now but couldn't make the one with next got scheduled, you'd have to wait for the following month. So it's sort of within 7 weeks, I suppose, is the design.
So it should be within that 2 month roll.
Absolutely, yeah, because there's 2 opportunities in that.
Martin,
period.
if you can't find it quickly, if you want to email me if it's easier, that's absolutely fine.
I think everyone on the Paul knows what you're doing there. You're accusing a man of not being able
No,
to
I'm
do
not
two
at all.
things at once.
No, I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing. I'm thinking about the transport that I have to now go and provide to get my daughter from school.
That's fair enough then. I'll get it to you as soon as I can, Sarah. Now you give me a get out.
What I'll do is I will put that link. My Share Together page is Heart and Rushmore. So whether you're in Heart and Rushmore or elsewhere, do come and join that page, and I will put the link that Martin can send me or to one of my colleagues at HPCN. We will pop that up because it sounds like an unusual thing to try and track down and find. Thanks all very much. Martin, thanks for your time. I appreciate
Thank you for that.
Oh, look, Martin's got it.
There you go.
Look, I'll whiz it in here, everybody, really quickly. You are a star. And I will still put it up on my page. Meanwhile, this will amuse you, Martin. I'm going to get my daughter by the transport that I get her to and from school. We only go a mile and a half. She goes in the back of a tandem. I bet she's the only one doing that in Hampshire. She might not be, but there you go.
That's fantastic.
It's cool, isn't it?
Yeah, brilliant.
I'll send you a picture. Right, and on that note, everyone, have a good weekend, and I will see you all soon.
Thanks very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.